Welcome everybody to the Tuesday, April 23rd informational meeting. Thanks for being here and watching if you're watching from home. We will start out calling the meeting to order. And first thing on the agenda is City Council open discussion. Anybody have any open discussion? Councilor Staley.
Yes, I have three things actually. Yesterday, the mayor and I attended the intergovernmental board meeting for the Multicultural Center. And one thing of interest that I thought was that they've been working with concerns in that facility as to whether they were going to allow alcohol or not. And they did ban alcohol and sales, their usage is down. So they're changing that, and they're going to start opening that up because they'd like to have more weddings and events held within that facility. And another thing they brought up, and so I wanted to talk to the council about this. I already talked to Councilor Selberg about it this morning. But the Festival of Cultures is going to be happening on June 8th. And so I asked them after the fact if we could have a booth there. And they were really excited about that. So that it goes from 11 to 6. And I was wondering if there's any feedback on that. I'd be happy to staff it all the time, and then, or we could take turns signing up for times. Jim David said he could sketch that out. So any thoughts from the council on that? Yes or no?
I'll be out of town.
Okay, you'd be out of town.
What was the date again?
June 8th. Councilor Starr?
Yes, I'd be in.
And we can't vote on it right now, but I just thought I'd see if
I'd be available.
anybody would be opposed to that. Councilor Kiley?
I have no idea at this point in time, Counselor.
I certainly wouldn't be against it. I'm open to seeing what it's all about.
Councilor
Anybody
Brecky? Well, it just, they said they have like between 20 and 30,000 people coming through. It's a kind of a celebration of ethnicity in our city. So I think it'd be nice to have a presence. And in the past, our city, one of our city attorneys would be Colleen Moran, I believe, had a booth out there. So I think it's on a Saturday. But okay, but I'm willing to, as long as if any of you would say no, don't do that, Teresa, we don't want city council showing up there, I certainly would take that under advisement. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the event center task force study group is having their second meeting tomorrow, 8:30 at the convention center. Now it's open to the public, so if anyone would like to mosey in, you could come in and listen to that discussion. And then lastly, I just wanted to tell the council that I have asked the Board of Ethics for an advisory opinion. I'll be appearing before them on Thursday at 10:30 in the old City Council chambers. And the reason I'm asking them for an advisory opinion is we received an invitation to an event at Sioux Steel next week, and it's to tell us about a project that's coming, and it's also after the event we're invited for hearty hors d'oeuvres and drinks. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought some examples that I think would be problematic is we recently had Mark Mickelson wanted to have us rezone a property so that he could put some apartment type units up over by the Keene Park and Oscar Howe area. And I thought, I wonder how the neighbors would feel if Mark Mickelson invited me to go to Minerva's for hearty hors d'oeuvres and drinks to talk to me about the project that I'd be voting on. Another example would be Lifescape. We had this issue where we were voting on the vacation, and if Rick DeSanto had invited me to go to Minerva's for hearty hors d'oeuvres and drinks to talk to me about vacating the property, the street, and/or rezoning that block for parking, I'm wondering how the neighbors would feel about that conversation and that event. Or if Craig Lloyd had invited us to Minerva's to discuss the Cascade project that we awarded a TIF to, and then he and I went out for drinks and hearty hors d'oeuvres to discuss that, how would the community feel about that? So I just think it's good before the event happens that we kind of get some feedback from the Board of Ethics, and our city attorney Stacy Koistra was very accommodating to set that up. And so That's why I will be meeting with them on Thursday, 10:30.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No other comments? Okay. In the name of time constraints, if there are no objections, we're doing just a little bit of a shuffle on the schedule and moving A to the end of the agenda. I think we'll still probably get to everything, but we do need to get done, hopefully have a public input starting by 5 and be done with that by 5:15 with our schedule tonight. So we will get things moving right along here. So we will start out with spring flood recovery update. Reagan Smith, welcome.
Thank you, Council. Regan Smith, Emergency Manager, Sioux Falls Fire Rescue, and thanks for giving us some time today. Just want to update you on the progress on the flood recovery, the disaster declaration process, and some initial cost estimates. Where are we at right now? First of all, Public Works has returned to normal operations following the flood fight. They're inspecting facilities, bridges, the flood control system, stormwater and utility, working on disposal of sandbags. The collection sites at Sherman, Tomar, and Riverdale parks are getting cleaned up. Park Department, a little different situation, but good news, all parks are open as of last Friday, thanks to the hard work of the park team and many community volunteers. Small portions of the bike trail system remain barricaded and they're still impacted by floodwater and debris. Those will reopen when waters go down and debris is removed. Recovery at the parks along Greenway is going to take some time, and we continue to ask the public to remain very patient here. I did share some picture books with you that show you the damage of the extent of the damage and debris throughout the park system. It might be something that you haven't seen up to date. Disaster declaration process. The city's working really hard with Minnehaha County, state of South Dakota on that process. The incident period is currently opened. It began on March 13th. We expect it's going to close tomorrow, barring any significant weather across the state. We need to work with the county to get that documentation through the county EM to the state by May 1st. And then once that happens, we'll conduct the preliminary damage assessment with the state of South Dakota and the Federal Emergency Management Agency the week of May 13th. Once that is done, all that information will be compiled. We know there are at least 60 counties that are pursuing this across the state. The governor will review that information, forward that to the federal government, and then the president will determine if a federal declaration is warranted. Just so you know, there are some minimum thresholds that we need to meet. There is a $3.82 per capita for that public assistance, and that's damage to city facilities. So Minnehaha County would need to have about 640,000, Lincoln County about 169, and the overall state of South Dakota 1.2 million. If we would be included with that declaration, the public assistance program includes reimbursement for debris removal, emergency protective measures. For us, that would be the flood fight, water rescue, barricading, things like that. Permanent work to our infrastructure, roads, bridges, utilities, and then of course the park system. There is a cost share to this, 75% federal, 15% local, and then 10% state. So where are we at here in Sioux Falls? We did, right when these disasters start or big emergencies start, we have finance start a project code. So we code all of our costs during this from day one. And just a snapshot of where we're at right now is overtime is the first item, and that's for parks, Public Works, Police, Fire, and then Planning and Development. They have expended $183,000 in overtime. Rentals for things like water pumps, barricades, some equipment, $155,000. Materials, sand, clay, the track bag system, $236,000, and then some bills or encumbrances that have not been paid yet, and those are things such as the filling of the track bag system by a private contractor, bridge inspections, removal of filled bags from those drop sites, some flood modeling we had done, and then emergency work at Brandon Lift Station, and then some signage that's been purchased at Yankton Trail Park, and that's at $155,000 also. So a total cost that we've incurred to date is $732,000. Not included in this is city equipment time that hasn't been compiled yet. We have not received the bill from the State Department of Corrections for the inmates, and we didn't include the full-time wages because those aren't an eligible item for FEMA. The permanent work, we did conduct an initial damage assessment across the city, and those totals came up to $1,450,000 for permanent damage at Legacy, Dunham, Yankton Trail, Tomar, Sertoma, Cherry Rock, Spencer, Riverdale, and Falls Parks. This includes things such as bridges, picnic shelters, a lot of electrical components, the Tut Hill Warming House, and various equipment items. Again, this equipment or this information will be compiled and shared with Minnehaha County and the state of South Dakota. The state and FEMA will inspect many of these sites that second week of May as part of that preliminary damage assessment. So what are we looking at least right now? Again, this is just a snapshot of today with that permanent work and that response work that we did during the actual flooding. We're at $2.1 million. Individual assistance. We're still encouraging residents that need help to contact Helpline Center at 211. The community fund that was established at the Sioux Falls Community Foundation is at about $25,000 right now. There is an unmet needs committee that has been meeting, and that's composed of the Community Foundation, Lutheran Social Services, United Way, ICAP, Community Outreach, and Sioux Falls Housing. We've got about 60 homeowners that have requested help. So that committee is going through and doing that case management with each of those requests. The Red Cross has also stepped up with a grant program, and we're matching those individuals with that program. And then the city has a no interest loan program that we're also offering those residents to at that time. As far as the FEMA Individual Assistance Program, we will be working again with the Minnehaha County and the state of South Dakota to do that preliminary damages assessment. We'll be submitting that information to the state for the FEMA surveys. But I'd really caution the council and then the residents that there really is no guarantee for federal assistance, disaster assistance for homeowners. In fact, it's a very rare for South Dakota to receive federal assistance for homeowners. So again, we're gonna do our best to gather that information, give it to the state and the federal government so they can make that assessment and provide relief if possible. With that, I do have some members of our flood team here from Parks, Public Works, and Finance, and we could answer questions.
Thank you, Regan. Any questions from the council? Councilor Sale?
Thank you for your presentation. I have two requests. You indicated that regular full-time wages are not reimbursable by FEMA, but could you provide to the council the total number of hours that city employees spent fighting the flood? I don't know if you have that.
I don't have the hours on me, but I can tell you those full-time wages were $258,000.
Thank you. And my second request is, I know as we filled sandbags that you had to log in and sign in, and those things I believe would probably be tracked. Do you have any idea how many hours and how many people were actually filling sandbags at the sites in Sioux Falls?
I do. I can tell you we had 2,800 volunteers, total volunteers. Of those 2,800, 2,500 helped with sandbaggings at 3,700 hours. And then we had, again, of that 2,800 volunteers, we had 363 volunteers gave 1,000 hours to help up with clean up of people's homes in the park system.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will mention with that, we did, working with the Helpline Center, track those hours and those names, and if we do secure a federal declaration, we can use that time. They come up with a wage for those folks, and we can use that as the city's soft match for the disaster. So we'll save the taxpayers a little bit of money here.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a couple real quick. I don't think I saw anybody else's hand up. So on this timetable, the declaration process, we've got dates down up until we get to the governor's consideration and if there would be a presidential declaration. What kind of timetable would we be looking at there? And if by chance it was approved, when would we hope to have funds in hand?
You know, it is a lengthy process, and you know, you never know how long those decisions are going to be made in Washington. But once we get a declaration, we'll have a kickoff meeting with those FEMA folks. They'll get out here, and it will take some time. I think for some of those costs that we had with that response and recovery that are pretty solid and pretty good, we could see some funding from that late this year. But those permanent costs, you know, you're going to look probably a year out.
Oh, okay. And is there a minimal expense that you have to hit or mark that you have to hit before you can even file or ask for federal assistance?
For the state of South Dakota, it's 1.2 million. They've got some dollars and you know, some thresholds to hit, and you know, as far as Minnehaha County, they lay it out as 640,000 to hit, and those are some guidance. You know, it's not hard and fast.
Interesting. And my last one, are you still receiving any calls for assistance from?
You know, that has slowed down with the Helpline Center, but they are getting, you know, a handful in every week, and they're trying to match those people. We're still having volunteers step up, athletic groups and things like that are helping people with their basements and tear down sandbags and things like that. So if people want to help, definitely call 211. If they need help, call 211.
Great. Well, nice job to you and your team. Thank you for the presentation.
All right, thank you.
Next, we will have Director Pritchett up to talk about the use of unobligated capital funds. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Sean Pritchett, Director of Finance. First item I'm going to talk about today is forthcoming requests for discussion on use of the supplemental appropriations for the fund balances that we had remaining from 2018. So as far as when we looked at the fund balances, and there was approximately $4.6 million that was available presently for appropriation. This would be through the capital fund, so the sales and use tax fund for capital projects. So at last week's council meeting, there was a discussion in regard to the first item, which was acquisition of flood-prone homes near Tomar Park, and that will come up for a second reading tonight. So there was $1 million request that was associated with that. The two other priorities that we've outlined, which have been priorities by the mayor, but also by the city council, as you kind of discussed them as part of your kind of budgeting process as well, was two items, the triage center and then streets improvements. And so I'm gonna kind of walk through the amounts and the type of projects that we're proposing to be funded through that. So presently, as of March 31st, the amount available fund balance in the capital fund was $4.64 million. So there's been a request for $1 million for the parkland acquisition for the flood-prone homes in Tomar Park area. The second portion is a triage center preparation request for $1.2 million. And I'm going to get into that a little bit further, but it is in regard to the city annex building and preparing for the possible use of that building for the triage center. And then the last one is the largest request, and that's for street improvements of $1.875 million. That would leave approximately $550,000 still not appropriated, and that would just be set aside and still available later in the year as additional items might arise that could be utilized that funding for. So, talking first about the triage center. So as you're aware, there is a group, and this includes the county, Minnehaha County, but it also includes Sanford Health, Sanford Hospital, as well as Vera McKinnon Hospital, and as well as the City Health, who have come together to explore this triage center concept. And that is presently in a implementation development phase for the triage center as they continue to work. There's been a consultant that's been hired to help work through the process of determining budget and also where a project like this might be located and what those services would all include. As they looked at potential locations, things that were important was proximity to healthcare providers, as well as to the county, to law enforcement, as well as to our own city health staff. And one of the locations that they looked at as they looked at different locations that kind of rose to the top as the preferred location was to look at the city annex building. Primarily because its size was apportioned right to what they were being proposed for the triage center, its proximity to the various partners that have been outlined, but the layout of that particular building is conducive to the triage center concept, and so that all kind of came into play as they looked at a potential optimal location. However, we are still continuing to use the city annex building. Right now, the Department of Innovations is located within that building. And so the proposal here that we're coming forward with is a relocation of that department to the third floor of the city center. That floor is unfinished presently and would need to be finished in order to relocate that department. Part of the reasons for the relocation, in addition to making the city annex building available for the triage center, is that there would be increased efficiencies by consolidating our administrative functions within City Hall and within the city center, and moving out of the city annex building. What would occur is what we're proposing right now is that GIS would actually move to the City Hall building, that portion, and then we would move the rest of the departments, so the help desk, the IT services, all of that would move to the third floor of the city center. Also, the other issue is that in terms of size of that building right now, we're running out of space for the Department of Innovations, and so we're really not having additional space available as we need to for the employees that are being hired there. So what we're looking at is a total request of $2 million, and that's what it would cost to finish the third floor, based on the estimates that have been put together by Public Works and by engineering. The request here is only for $1.2 million. The difference of that is about $840,000. So that $840,000 is comprised of two components. One, there's about $550,000 left in the existing city center building construction project budget that would be available to help finish that third floor. The second component is there's about $290,000 of the bond that was originally issued for the city center that was never appropriated. So it was kind of the last piece that it was not appropriated as part of the construction budget. So there's actually $290,000 that still could be appropriated, but would require an appropriation from this body as well. So $550,000 is already appropriated. We would have to ask for two pieces, the $1.2 million from the sales tax fund to be allocated to this project, and then the $290,000 from the rest of that bond. The second piece of the request is the $1.875 million that's related to the streets improvements and highways budget. So we are getting into that phase where we're already going to construction, and so determining shovel-ready projects is a little bit more of a challenge this time of year because you have to have time for design and for implementation, and then to hire contractors to do the work. So the easiest thing to do is to take some of those funds and make them available through some of our current street rehabilitation funds. And so the request has been for $1.575 million for the Asphalt Street Reconstruction Fund or Rehabilitation Fund. And the projects that would be slated for use of those funds would be 49th Street, That would be from Marion Road to Solberg Avenue. The second piece would be Minnesota Avenue from 2nd Street to 4th Street and from 11th Street to 18th Street. And then also the 6th Street from Minnesota Avenue east of Main Avenue. Lastly, the piece that comes into play here is a request for $300,000 to begin the design phase for Marion Road to Madison to Maple. And the reason for that is because at the time that we put together the original CIP, we weren't aware of, at that time, where the new location of the high school would be. That was decided in October, long after the CIP had been approved for 2019. So this would allow some funds to be allocated to begin the design phase for that, to stay in target with work that we may need to do as it relates to that high school construction, which would be a planned project for 2020. In terms of the supplemental timeline, this evening you'll take up the second reading and adoption for the parkland acquisition portion for the $1 million that's been requested for that. As far as the streets portion and for the triage center portion, we would have planned for a first reading request on May 7th and a second reading of that appropriations request on May 14th. Also on May 14th, we would also have a resolution amending the capital program for the triage center and as well as the street improvements. With that, there's several people here in the audience that hopefully can help back me up on some specific questions you might have if they're related to the triage center as well as from Public Works related to the projects that are being proposed there.
Thanks, Director Pritchett. Questions? Councilor Staley?
Sean, now I thought that the triage center was going to be funded by, it was going to be a shared project with the county and with the city and then with private entities. You're going out to the hospitals. So where's that at?
That is still in the discussion phases in terms of how the players, everybody is already in discussions of how they would, everyone is agreed to participate. How the city participates, if it's more on the capital side, so if we're utilizing our building, then we wouldn't necessarily, we would look at what our real contribution would be on the operational side. So we would take into consideration.
So what's the county putting forth for capital expenses? I mean, I guess I'd like to see the whole piece, because I thought when we've had these discussions in the past, I've raised this question is how we're going to fund this thing, and I was always told it was going to be a joint project. In fact, I was kind of led to believe that maybe the hospitals were going to step up and take the brunt of the whole thing. So this is the first I've ever heard that the city is going to be providing the actual physical structure. And is this something everyone's bought into as far as having it located at this place?
Correct. And I can have
is the county
Frank can talk about that, but yes, the county and the healthcare providers have all been involved in that conversation. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been a final decision as far as the building itself, whether, if there's a new entity set up, whether that takes ownership of it, and then there has to be shared cost in acquiring the building, or if the city contributes that and we don't contribute as much on the operational side ongoing. So those are still.
I'd really like to see the county here to hear from them what they're going to be putting forth. Because I thought this was going to be a shared effort. I didn't think it was going to be city provides the physical structure. Not that I'm not, I certainly support the project, but it's always been presented since I've been involved, is that it's going to be shared.
And to be clear, the funding that's being requested is to finish the third floor of the city center. So it does make the building available, but it's not stating that we're necessarily just giving the building at this point in time. Those discussions are still underway. So the funding for this is to finish the third floor of the city center exclusively, which would be our cost to complete that building, so that we can make the city annex available for that.
Councilor Kiley?
Yes, thank you. So in other words, Sean, we can make the investment up front, but we can still recoup our investment from the other stakeholders in the triage center.
Right. We're essentially investing in our own space to relocate a department to make the building available. But as far as the parameters for how that is handled financially is still in discussions between the county and the healthcare providers. And all have, as far as I'm aware, agreed to contribute. We just haven't detailed out specifically because we're still waiting on the numbers for what the operational costs will be ongoing and how that will be shared going forward too. as well as any rehabilitate or any rehab costs that would be incurred for the city annex building.
And what are you planning to put on the third floor?
That's where the Department of Innovations would be relocated to, third floor city center.
Were you still going?
Okay, thank you. So I understand that we're finishing off the third floor of the city center for our own use, for city use.
Correct.
And that's why we built the additional space in the first place for future use such as this. And then with the triage center, again, going back to my question, once this is all formalized between city, county, and our health systems, there are avenues available for us to, it's similar to Metro 911, which is shared between the city and the council, where we're paying rent to the county for use of the facility, and we're sharing the costs of the employees and healthcare, so forth. But there's avenues available such as that with the use of the annex building.
And I failed to point out too, the timing of this is important because, you know, it will take between design and completion of construction and getting bids and completing construction for the third floor city center. We wouldn't be able to vacate the city annex until probably December of this year. So there's just so much lead time. I know that I think it's been a goal for the triage center to at least begin a pilot phase of that project in early 2020. So to get to that, that's kind of why the request is coming now. This is, I guess the first piece of it is to be able to vacate that building so that they can be utilized for that purpose.
Councilor Neitzer?
Yeah, and a couple of points. Of course, maybe we kick in more capital and then somebody else kicks in more operating and then it equals out.
Yes.
So,
yep.
Well, first of all, anybody who's been in the annex and seen IT, they're squished. It's like walking back into 1972. So it would be good to get that taken care of. But, you know, as I was thinking about it, this is really kind of a gift that's kind of come to us here, that it's just this perfect location in that this is a really important thing, but it's not, I'll just be blunt, it's not something somebody's going to want in their neighborhood. They're just not. And I remember years ago, you know, I love the Bishop Dudley House. I'm a huge fan, but I remember sitting in this room as a citizen and the amount of concern, you know, that's went on, and that still is a subject of concern. So to have something that's downtown, close to all of those things, but also it's not going to be something where somebody's going to be told, oh, by the way, we're going to put this in your neighborhood. So I think there's a big win there as well.
I think that's a really important point, and I think one thing as I look at this too, you know, mental health is such a hidden issue sometimes within our community. We don't always know or are willing to acknowledge the extent to which it impacts our families. I think we're just starting to come to an understanding of how that impacts our community. I think having this particular facility basically within the city campus is a symbolic gesture that shows to the community at large how important this issue is. So important to us that we're willing to put it right beside our city hall and make it a priority for us going forward.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councilor Kiley?
And just one other initial thought that I had while you were presenting this is I like the balance that is struck here with this proposal, because we're meeting the needs of the many with the street improvements, but we're also meeting the needs of the few and the needy, the individuals that we will address this evening in Lotta and Rose Streets, as well as the individuals that are going to be needing the services of the triage center. So I really do like that balance. Good proposal. Thank you.
Councilor Starr?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. First, Director, thank you. I think this is a great proposal. It's a good starting point for us to look at the priorities of the city, and as we look at, as a council, how to move some of these funds around to use the surpluses, the additional funds that, you know, our tax collections were a little better, but we were also prudent in some of our construction projects to accumulate this capital surplus. So I'm glad that you're able today to bring, you know, some ideas forward for us to put into play. as we take a look at those funds. I guess my initial impression, one of the things that concerns me, and it's probably a question maybe for Director Franken, I know she was halfway up here a minute ago, but I guess my concern using a third floor facility for people who are intoxicated and difficult to move is that really, would the triage center be better in a location where it's on the first floor? It was one of the ride-alongs that I did with the police department. Taking people to detox is a little difficult where detox is located now because it's on an upper level. Whether it's second or third, doesn't matter. You still have an elevator ride. You still have some uncooperative people, some things that happen. And that's kind of the clientele of a triage center. Does it make sense to put this type of facility on a third level facility?
Well, so the Department of Innovations will be on the third floor of City Center. As far as, so that whole building will be available for the triage center. Of the city annex building would be available for the triage center, and that's the intent, is to have the triage center at the city annex.
Gotcha.
And there is some conduciveness in terms of where the doors and so forth are, that they've toured the facility, the consultant has been in there, the partners have toured the facility and have looked at that layout and found it to be conducive to the kind of proposals for the programs and services that they're looking to do.
Okay. If I could, Mr. Chair, one of the things that I guess that the other that stands out for me is that the leftover construction money, the trying to do that. Has your department, maybe I missed it and I apologize, but have we done a tie out of the building of what things cost, the final, we paid for some additional cooling units, we've done some things. Have we really put a proposal or a presentation together of where we're at, where the building came in, what the final construction costs were, and kind of presented that to the council?
I haven't seen like a full layout for the final for that building. But working with engineering, they laid out how much funds were going to be left after everything else that they know is kind of outstanding there in terms of the change orders and the cooling systems and so forth. So the 550 was approximately what they felt comfortably was remaining within that budget that wouldn't currently be encumbered or planned to be encumbered for those.
As comfort levels go, before we spend money, it seems to me that the council should take a look at where the building came in at. And not just estimates and feelings, but kind of give us a amount of where we're at with the building and where that makes sense. I mean, it's kind of hard to move forward with those. I mean, these are new numbers I'm assuming they're new numbers because I don't recall seeing any of these numbers before this afternoon. So before we move forward on some of those things, it would make me feel much more comfortable to know where the building came in and a short presentation of, did we bring it in under budget? What further expenses do we have into the future? Are we really at the end? And so getting that presentation, I think, would be really good before we move forward with spending those dollars. The other question that I think a lot of us ask often is, what else was on the list? Were there other things that were considered but didn't make the final cut? We have things, I think, as counselors that we'd want to see included in this list. Was there an additional list or additional projects that just didn't make the cut?
There's always more projects than what there is funding available to do it. I think, other high priority things that even have been talked about here at the council, certainly we're still talking about the public safety facility. And so, whether we borrow for that, do we use some of the funds to help make a down payment on that? As we've looked at that, and that's a project that continues to come together, but it is, going in phases in terms of looking at partners and so forth as we put together that project. So it's taking a little bit longer than originally anticipated. So there really wasn't going to be a need probably for funding in 2019 for that project. As we look at 2020, we're actually looking at a whole bonding approach that may include some debt reduction as part of that bonding request. And it kind of encapsulates that whole public safety facility, but we're also continuing discussions with partners and how that would play into part for that and what funding gets brought to the table as part of that. So it was a little too early to look at that particular project. As far as streets and highways, there's always additional projects that you can take a look at there. That's kind of a broader conversation that we'll continue to have. Certainly, again, that was something that was, I think, your highest priority here from the City Council, is the streets and the highways. And we're continuing those conversations as to how we look at the CIP and budgeting for the next several years to carve out additional funds for streets and highways as part of that and making that a continuing priority as well. So those conversations continue, but certainly there's always more projects than what you have funds available.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think this is going to really help us from a policy standpoint of prioritizing these projects and fitting them in as we move forward. So really appreciate it. Thanks.
Madam Chair, welcome.
Sorry for being late. I apologize. Business calls sometimes. A couple questions, if you don't mind. One, what I appreciate about what you've brought forward is, as we as a council just went through 2 working sessions, really streets and triage were near the tippy top of our list, and those items are identified here on our list. So for that, I'm grateful that was paid attention for our work session. It really goes hand in hand with really what we just communicated and ranked amongst ourselves, if you will. As for the triage center, it's my understanding that was the former Community Falls Health years and years ago. And so as we've discussed this location, and the consultant Travis Parker has talked about, what works, what doesn't work in other communities, this drop-off and pickup location is close to services downtown. It's close. It's easy to get to, essentially. The pickup through the alley, you have to look at ambulances being able to drop off as well as really it's a blank canvas once IT is relocated to the 3rd floor, and really that also creates the collaboration that we've desired to have for city staff, is having that collaboration amongst other departments. But once it's really a blank canvas for us as we work together. Again, if you look, it says it's triage. I'm missing it here, but it's really just to get it ready for that next phase. It's not saying that this has to be here, but this is what will be recommended in the future. And then all the funding and all the other parts are still being worked on as we work with our consultant. Both hospital systems did donate to that, did give to that for us to be able to move that forward, and really this is the next step in that process. And so I'm appreciative of that, and really for it to be everyone involved, because there has been county, state, judges, sheriffs, police chief, Lincoln County, Minnehaha County. It's been a wide array of folks involved in that. So the other item you did already address was the public safety facility. That was on the tip of my tongue as far as what next with that, and if this is included or not. But good to know it's being looked at and on your list of things as you move forward. So again, I'm grateful that from our working session that those items were addressed, and it's really the top of our list. So thank you.
Anybody else?
If I can just mention a couple other items that will be coming down the pipeline. Sorry.
No.
That will be coming down the pipeline too, just as additional potential appropriation requests. First of all, we had the presentation from Regan about the Parks and Rec and some of the damages that occurred there. So very likely we will have a request coming from the Parks and Rec side. That will come from general funds, however, so that would be something that we'd be look at funding through our reserves currently. We're going to have some additional grant funds that will be requested. We've received some grants for landfill, police, so there'll be some additional supplemental appropriations that will be coming along with that. Just an update on the snow budget, because that has always been kind of an issue, unfortunately, for the last several months. We're about 84% through our budget on snow removal currently. So similar to last year, provisional supplemental for snow removal will likely occur, whether we have to actually use it or not. But that's something we'll look at coming this fall, similar to the way we did last year. So I just wanted to pinpoint those as well. Sorry.
Councilor Brecky?
No, I was just going to, more of a comment than a question, but just really excited that you're at the point, the triage committee is at the point to make this really important first step. I think there's been pressure on the committee most recently to make their move, and so I see this as, they've been very thoughtful in their work, and again, I'm excited that they're at this point, and I'm excited that we're able to fund it. It was my number one priority for the city this year. I was really hoping that they would be at this place, and I realize, like Councilmember Erickson just said, I mean, this is, it's step, but we're stepping into it. I think this is an incredibly important first step, but I think it's important that the community understand this is just a first step. Having had the privilege of attending 2 national conferences this year, cities all across the nation are at different levels of trying to address what I will call, you know, the addiction and mental health crisis, because I don't like using the term opioid because now it's fentanyl. I mean, it's just jumping all over the place, but we are in a state of emergency in the country, and cities are in different places. There's cities, you know, a handful that are far ahead of us, and this is just a first step in the different kinds of things that we're going to need to be doing to immerse ourselves in the solutions. And one of the statements that I heard that was just, you know, very sad, but they said, if we could just stop at this juncture and just deal with the addictions and the problems that we have out there right now, it would still take us 3 decades to do it. This is a problem that's going to be long-term, and this is a first step, a really important one. But just so people know, I mean, it needs to keep going and going and going. I know the triage has 4 different goals, and this is just goal number 1, you know, to deal with that initial diagnosis and getting people the help they need, but it needs to take place in layers, and there's going to be more to come. And I'm just excited that they're at the point where we can really start moving forward and appreciate the work they've done and appreciate that, yeah, you're interested in using our supplemental funds for this project. So thank you.
Yeah, I would probably second those comments. It's very exciting to see the ball get rolling on this triage center. And yes, there's plenty of details and questions to be worked out, but it's nice to see it get going because we need it, and the sooner the better. One question I have, the street improvements, those stretches we talk about up there, 49th from Marion to Solberg and right in there, when would that work start? And when would it be done? Any timetable on that yet, or is?
I did not ask the question. I'll ask Chad if he wants to talk about timeline for that.
Chad Evie with Public Works. That project is shovel ready. Plans are done. It's ready to bid. So really, we would advertise, open bids, and get started as soon as we can. So it'll get done this year.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, no other questions. We'll move on to Director Pritchett is up again. We've got the March monthly financials. And again, just a reminder, we'd like to be able to start public comment by 5 o'clock. We need to be done by 5:15, so.
All right, so we're going to go through this fairly quickly today, but this is the first monthly financial report that we do, and that's typical because we close out the audit before we can begin providing our monthly financial reports. So that had been closed out and was presented yesterday. Just very briefly, not going to go into a lot of depth, but unemployment rate still hovering very low for our community, sitting at 2.8% as of March. We also continue to see slow but steady growth in terms of our labor force. Kind of a piece to point out on the inflation rate. March 2019 was at 1.9%, so at a real healthy level. You know, you'd like to keep that at the 2% range. And so we've seen a major reduction on the energy side, which has kind of kept overall prices in check for the community. And this is the same slide we had from last time, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about employee wages, but I do want to point this one out. We talked a little bit about farm income several months ago and some concerns that we have there. We had some updated figures from Q4 of 2018, so saw some positive change there in terms of where farm income has come in, and it was the highest that we'd seen since the Q4 of 2015. I'm a little surprised by these numbers because if you've talked to a lot of farmers and so forth, it hasn't materially improved in the ag economy right now, but hopefully this might be boding something better forthcoming. So we'll continue to be watching those as we go forward. Building permit numbers, just to kind of give you a snapshot here. So through March, we had approximately $134 million worth of building permits. That compares to $104 million last year. So we are up as far as last year, and we're very comparable to where we were through March of 2017. One item to note here that's a little bit more interesting is that we're seeing a reduction in permits for all across the spectrum for housing. So our single-family housing permits are down about 30% through portion of the year. Our multifamily housing permits are about 50% down, and our other, which would include townhomes and so forth, are down about 33% as well. So we are seeing some reduction on the housing. I'm not sure exactly what's explaining a lot of that. Some of that might be weather-wise, but we'll continue to watch those going forward. So we've had strong overall permit values, and that, again, is continuing to be driven by commercial permits, which is still very robust. Probably the most interesting to most people would be where we sit in terms of our sales tax collections. The first 3 months of this year have been very strong. So in January, we had 6.7% increase, 4.7% in February, and 6.6% in March. So our 12-month rolling average continues to move upwards, and it was 5.1% through March. That compares to 4.5% for 2018. So we're continuing to see upward trending there. And then on our entertainment tax collections, where January and February were pretty consistent with our rolling 12-month average, we did see a large increase again in March at 8.2% increase. So our rolling average, similar to our sales tax, is about 5.3%. And again, you do see a lot more volatility on a month-to-month basis, but consistently, we still continue to see those upward trending overall. As far as our general fund percentage has been expended, so through March, we've expended approximately 16% of our budget, and that compared to about, or excuse me, I'm talking about revenues here. We've received about 16% of the revenue that we expected on budget-wise. This compares to about 17% last year. The one thing that's a little bit downward trending right now is property tax revenues are a little bit less than what had been originally anticipated, but we feel there's going to be some catch-up going on throughout the remainder of the year, so we expect those to catch up a little bit as the year continues. The other piece, bank franchise taxes continue to be coming in pretty strong. I think we budgeted $1 million. We've already received $1.7 million for that, and of course, our sales tax revenues continue to be stronger than what we had originally projected as well. As far as expenses, through a quarter of the year now, we've expended approximately 22% of our budget. That compares to about 21% for last year, so not significantly different. Most of our areas are in line with where our expectations have been. I would say our streets budget is higher than originally anticipated, and that, again, is being driven a lot by the snow, and that drove for our budget where we are for that. So. Any questions on the financial presentation?
Questions? Doesn't look like we have any.
Wait, I'm not going to let you off the hook. I'm not going to let you off the hook that easy. My question is in regards to the entertainment tax. We see that really go up and down and up and down. So my question is why such the influx of that? Does it have anything to do with, we certainly know that the Premier Center has huge amounts of sales, and then does it depend on when items are on sale and announced? Does that have anything to do with that if all of a sudden there's 3 huge shows that are announced and go on sale in a month? Is that going to be that big of an influx, or what are we seeing for that?
Certainly a possibility, but I think we'd have to look at the numbers, but if you looked at the broad range of what that tax is collected on, whether it's restaurants or beverages and so forth, I mean, I think that probably makes up a disproportionate share of the overall budget. So I don't think it's probably driven in part by that. I think it probably leads to some volatility there, but it really, I'd have to look at the numbers more to give you a more definitive answer on that.
And then if I could have one follow-up too, any updates or anything with, we know we won the Supreme Court case a while back. Any updates with that as far as online sales tax?
We've continued to ask the state if they've been able to kind of distinguish on the online sales tax piece to where that is. And I think Cody had gotten any response back from the state in terms of how that is factoring in yet. There's a possibility that we're seeing some of that occurring, especially with some of the stronger growth that we've had over the last 3 months in particular. But we'll continue to watch that closely too.
Thank you.
And if we have additional information, we'll pass that along.
That sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll open it up if there's any public input on anything we've discussed today. Okay, doesn't look like it. So we will adjourn and be back at 5:30. Thank you.